Welcome to Biology Made Easy. Today we are starting a new series on transport or circulation. In today's lesson, we'll look at the overview of transport in all organisms. Welcome. Our discussion today focuses on substances that are transported, characteristics of substances transported, structures or channels that transport substances in different groups of organisms. We'll also look at forces that transport substances in different groups of organisms, medium in which substances are transported, all in different groups of organisms. Substances that are transported are nutrients, that's food substances and gases. We have metabolic waste, and we have other substances. Now, look at the metabolic waste. You have carbon dioxide, urea or uric acid, other substances from protein metabolism. You have excess water, excess salt. Then other substances that are transported includes traces of hormones, enzymes, antibodies. Antibodies are chemicals. You have heat, and you have pathogens, viruses, bacteria. These can be transported in all organisms. Then you have blood cells, red blood cells, white blood cells, blood platelets. You have blood proteins, and these are substances that are transported in chordates. Now, what are the characteristics of substances transported? Yes, substances transported must have some characteristics, isn't it? Because not all substances can be transported. So what are their characteristics? One is that all nutrients or metabolic waste, other substances like hormones, enzymes, antibodies, these substances are all soluble. That is, they are dissolved in solution. They are tiny, low molecular weight substances, and they are found in regulated amounts. Regulated amounts because, cells have limited ranges that they function. Limited range of salts, pH, temperature. And so these substances we talk about, they are in regulated quantities in cells. And then all these substances, all nutrients, all metabolic waste, and these other substances we have mentioned, they are found in all living cells. But then unusual substances like pathogens, viruses, bacteria, blood cells, they are not dissolved. And you have pathogens, viruses, they can occur in all cells, but blood cells are not in cells. They are kept in tubes. We'll talk about them later. So we'll look at transport in different groups of organisms, unicellular or simple multicellular like amoeba, hydra, moths. You have multicellular like flying plants and mammals, because there are differences in the structures or channels that transport the substances, forces by which substances are transported, medium in which substances are transported. There are differences. Well, in unicellular or simple multicellular ones, the structures or channels that transport substances is the whole cell. For instance, you have this amoeba here. Nutrients that move in are transported in the cytoplasm. Metabolic waste will be transported out, and other substances like enzymes and hormones, they are transported in the same cell. So the structure or channels that transport the substance will be cells. Now, if you take a simple multicellular one like a moss plant, I have this small moss plant drawn here. The moss plant has number of cells, and substances are transported from cell to cell. And so the structures or channels that transport substances in this moss plant, simple multicellular, are cells. Now, what about the forces by which substances are transported? Because if a substance will move from one point to another point, there must be a force that moves the substance. And in these unicellular or simple multicellular organisms, the forces that move the substances are diffusion, active transport, and osmosis. Salts and food substances will diffuse from one point to another. Water will move by osmosis. Food substances and other substances can move by active transport. And in mosses, or simple multicellular ones made up of cells, the same process, diffusion, active transport, and osmosis, are the forces that move substances around. The medium in which substances are transported in these unicellular or simple multicellular organisms is water. Nutrients, food substances, metabolic waste, and other substances are dissolved in water and dissolved from one point to another. So the medium is water. Good. What about multicellular organisms like flowering plants and big ones like chordates, mammals? Let's take flowering plants first. We take flowering plants, even a small flowering plant like you have, or a huge one, as you can see, this hyperon. Substances cannot move easily through the whole plant from cell to cell as is done in a simple multicellular organism or unicellular. And so these flowering plants have transport systems made up of tubes. You have long tubes that will transport the substances fast, and then the substances will then move into the cells. And so the long tubes in flowering plants, you have xylem vessels and phloem tubes with a cell. So in flowering plants, the long tubes transport system that carry the substances fast is xylem and the phloem. Xylem vessels and phloem sieve tubes. These are tubes that carry substances fast, get the substances to the cells. So we have an example. We have the root, we have the stem, we have leaf. Root, the cells absorb water, mineral salts, carry it fast to the xylem vessels, which are the tubes transport system, and then get the substances to the cells of the stem and the cells of the leaves. So in flowering plants, the structures or channels that transport substances, xylem vessels, phloem sieve tubes, and cells. Cells alone, as is done here, cannot do the transport fast enough to support the life of the flowering plants. So what about the forces that transport substances in flowering plants? These are the forces: transpirational force or pull, root pressure. Then we have diffusion, active transport, and osmosis. So transpirational pull is this. You see, the aerial parts of the plant, the stem, if it's herbaceous or even when it's woody, it has lentils, holes. Right. Now, the leaves lose water by evaporation. Water evaporates from the leaves, moves out of the leaf through the stomata and cuticle, largely the stomata. As the leaves lose water by evaporation, more water is passed on from the cells, and finally, water is drawn from the xylem. Now, as the leaves lose water by evaporation and causes more water to be moved to replace the water loss, a suction is created to suck water from the xylem up, and that is transpirational pull or transpirational force. Suction created as a result of evaporation from the aerial part that pulls water or sucks water from the roots. So transpirational force or pull is one of the forces that transport substances. Then we have root pressure. It's also a force that transports water and mineral salts from the roots. It moves water and mineral salts for a short distance in the xylem. What creates the force of water in the xylem is a buildup of water in the xylem. The buildup of water in the xylem results from the endodermis, this endodermis, pushing salts actively into the xylem. So the osmotic potential in the xylem builds up, so water draws from other cells into the xylem, building a lot of water in the xylem, causing pressure that pushes water and mineral salts out. So root pressure is also one of the forces that aids the transport of substances in the plants. Then we have pressure differences in the phloem also that transport substances. This is the phloem. Now, photosynthesis takes place in the leaves and other green parts of the plant. When photosynthesis occurs, sugar is formed. Sucrose that is formed is moved from cell to cell, gets into the phloem. By these pressure differences, sucrose flows through the sieve tubes very quickly, then it can get into the cells. So, pressure differences in the phloem also transport substances in flowering plants. Then we have diffusion, active transport, and osmosis also doing the transport, because when substances are transported fast in the xylem and the phloem, they get into cells, and substances are transported from cell to cell by diffusion or active transport or osmosis, or both three forces. So you see, when you come to these unicellular organisms and simple multicellular, the forces that transport substances are diffusion, active transport, osmosis. When you come to multicellular ones like flowering plants, the forces are transpirational force or pull, root pressure, pressure differences in the phloem, as well as diffusion, active transport, and osmosis, because it will get to the cells where these are needed. So that is it. Now, what about mammals? Mammals also have a transport system of long tubes made up of arteries, veins, capillaries. Arteries and veins are long tubes. Capillaries too are long and tiny, but the way they are twined, you may think they are not long. So, channels that transport substances. In mammals, you have transport system of arteries, veins, capillaries. They are tubes. So we have the arteries here, the red bits. You have capillaries that nerve the organs, and then you have the veins. Now, the arteries transport substances to the organs. The arteries divide into smaller tubes and finally into capillaries that nerve the organs, and then the capillaries join together to form the venule and the vein, and these are the transport system, the tubes. But then the substances are carried by the arteries, arterioles, we'll talk about the smaller arteries, finally the capillaries. These are tubes, but then they move into cells when they get into the organs. So the structures that transport substances in the mammals are these tubes plus the cells. Notice similarly, tubes in the flowering plants as well as cells. The smaller ones, only cells. Good. Now, what about the forces by which the substances are transported in the mammals? You see, the force that moves the substances around, you have the heart contractions or the heartbeat. This heart contracts and beats to push the substances into the arteries, and the substances move and finally get into the capillaries, move into the cells, and then gets back into the venules and the vein. So the force that does it, one of it, the main force, is the contractions of the heart. But another force provided by skeletal muscle contractions also help. They help when blood is pumped with force by the heart into the arteries. They finally get into the capillaries that are very tiny tubes. They lose pressure, they flow into the veins, and the blood that transport the substances should get the substances back into the heart. It's lost pressure, and so the skeletal muscles of the legs contract to push the blood in the veins. So if this is a skeletal muscle, the muscle contracts, it becomes shorter, and it relaxes and it becomes longer. So as it contracts, if there's a blood vessel nearby, that's a vein, As the skeletal muscle contracts, it pushes on the vein and so pushes the blood on. So the contractions of the skeletal muscles, especially in the legs, the lower part of the body, also help to push substances in veins around. Besides the contractions of the heart and the skeletal muscles, the substances get into the tissues and they move by diffusion, active transport, and osmosis because they are in the cells. So the same force here is found also here once the substances get into the cell. Now, what about the medium in which substances are transported in the mammals? The substances are transported in blood plasma. The substances are not transported in blood, it's blood plasma. The fluid of blood is blood plasma. That's what the substances dissolve in and are transported. Now, even the blood cells that are transported, they are also transported by the plasma carried around in the tubes. Now, you also have tissue fluid and lymph. Also are media in which substances are dissolved. Now, tissue fluid, you have cells. These are cells. This is a capillary. We said medium in which substances are transported is not only blood plasma, but tissue fluid and lymph also transport substances in mammals. Now, tissue fluid is the fluid that bathes cells. So if these are cells, in between the cells are intercellular spaces. There's fluid in between these cells, and that fluid is called tissue fluid. Substances dissolve into it and it causes the substances to move, transport. Substances move in, substances move out. So tissue fluid is one of the media through which substances are transported. Lymph is simply tissue fluid in a vessel. So if some of this tissue fluid flows in this vessel, that is called lymph. These are things we are going to discuss further in detail. Well, this is what we'll have for today. If the lesson has been useful, please give us your thumbs and do subscribe. Thank you very much. Goodbye.